Coming to you live, as Justin mentioned, from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. The Jewish Museum and Archives of BC is grateful to operate on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, including the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. And the material I'll be covering today also references the unceded lands of the Loa Nation, the Shilshan Nation, the Sinumwaks, the Snanaas, the Cowichan, the Comox, the Tzlamin First Nation, the Algonquin, the Malahat, the Pachidat, the Sianu, the Tsuke peoples, the Lele Tene, the Ktunaxa, the Kinvasit peoples, and the Shuswap Nation, the Kwantlen, Katsi, Semiami, and Tawasan First Nations, the Syilx, and the Sinix peoples. So founded in 1971, the Jewish Museum and Archives of BC is dedicated to the preservation and sharing of community memories of Jewish life in British Columbia. Our archives have seen consistent growth since the mid-1960s, before the organization was even formally established, and they now comprise over 325 linear meters of textual materials, 325,000 photographs, and close to 1,000 oral history interviews. These materials document all aspects of Jewish community life in BC and are the basis for all our programs and publications, including exhibits, walking tours, podcasts, books, and our annual journal, The Scribe. So let's begin. British Columbia, in the red there, is Canada's westernmost province. It's approximately twice the size of California in terms of physical size, with about 1/8 the population. European settlement of the future province began in the mid-1700s and accelerated rapidly following the discovery of gold in the Fraser Canyon in 1858. The Fraser Canyon being sort of the bottom center of the province there, coming up from, or feeding into the ocean by the bottom left corner there, where Vancouver is. At that time, the British outpost of Victoria, with its few hundred residents of European descent, sat within much larger Indigenous population, was the only sizable settlement in Western Canada. Now,
we can't see a map.
You can't see my map? You can't see the screen sharing?
Oh, we can see the map.
I can see it.
You can.
I can see it.
All right. Well, I see your face, but I don't. All right. It's my error.
Might be able to change your settings. I'm not totally sure. I'm sorry.
We can see it.
You should have an option of what you see in your view options there.
Right.
So those who can see the map there, I apologize that the dots indicating Vancouver and Victoria got bumped both to the right a little bit. So the yellow dot there that is labeled as Victoria is actually where Vancouver is. And Victoria should be at the bottom tip of Vancouver Island, the large island just at the Washington border there. For a sense of scale, one of the things they always told us in Hebrew school was that Vancouver Island is almost exactly the same size as Israel. So there you go. So back in 1858, gold was discovered. There was an early European settlement to the area. Had been there since the 1700s, it accelerated with the discovery of gold. Victoria, at the bottom of Vancouver Island there, was the seat of government, which it remains today, and the gateway through which all immigrants were required to pass. Vancouver was then only a small settlement of a few shops and huts, known then as Granville. Canada would not be established until 1867, 9 years later, and British Columbia would not become a Canadian province until 1871. And one of the conditions for BC to become a province was the completion of the Transcontinental Railway. Up to then, it was very unclear. There was some concern in Ottawa that this new territory would be taken over by the Americans, and so they really wanted to ensure that they had access to the Pacific Ocean there. Before the founding of Canada, the region that would later become British Columbia was a pair of British colonies effectively operated from a series of trading posts by the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company. Fur trading was the primary concern prior to the discovery of gold. The news of the discovery quickly reached San Francisco and prompted a massive wave of migration. Nearly overnight, Victoria boomed as gold seekers streamed in on their way to the mining sites. Spurred by further discoveries over the next few years, especially the Caribou Rush in 1862, which is a little further north and into the interior of British Columbia there, Victoria continued to grow as a bustling port, an administrative and commercial center, and the place to purchase supplies and licenses before heading into the wilderness. Here we have an engraving of early Victoria, some small shops, some stone shops starting out, and on the left there beside the bank, just to the left of the bank, you see a shop with the name Gambits. We'll come back to that in just a second. BC's gold was discovered just as the California gold sites, which had originally attracted so many fortune seekers to the west coast of North America, were declining. During the California gold rush, San Francisco had developed a well-established Jewish community, including numerous merchants and professionals. With news of the new discoveries, many headed north, some attracted as prospectors, but most to establish businesses or branch offices of their San Francisco companies. Experienced in the ways of American and British society, the early Jewish community of Victoria was well positioned to fit in and thrive in the pluralistic society of late 19th century Victoria. A Jewish merchant class emerged, providing the community with the financial underpinnings to develop amenities, including clubs, fraternal and benevolent societies, schools, a cemetery, and a synagogue. Volunteer groups brought the community together, both socially and in the name of political action and tzedakah. The first Jews arrived in 1858 and wasted no time in establishing community infrastructure. Within months of the first Jewish arrivals in Victoria, Katie Gambits, there you go, that's his store there, hosted a meeting at his dry goods shop on August 29th, 1858, to discuss the important matter of finding a venue for high holiday services. These services, the first in the Pacific Northwest, were so notable that they received mention in newspapers in Victoria, San Francisco, New York, and Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Occident predicted that, quote, a prosperous congregation would soon spring up in Victoria, unquote. And indeed, one did, just months later. The Hebrew Benevolent Society was soon established, and the Weekly Victoria Gazette reported on October 1st, 1859, that the society had purchased 1.7 acres land from the Hudson's Bay Company for the creation of a Jewish cemetery. With pomp and ceremony, the site was established in February 1860, the first Jewish cemetery in Western Canada and the oldest non-Indigenous cemetery in continuous use in the province today. And there it is, a few years back. With the cemetery established, focus shifted to the construction of a synagogue. The cost and difficulty reaching consensus needed to accommodate a range of Jewish religious practices hindered the process. By 1862, a congregation was formed under the name of the Emmanuel Victoria, Vancouver Island. Reflective of its namesake, founded in San Francisco in 1850. A parcel of land was bought at the intersection of Blanchard and Pandora Streets at the northern edge of town, which today is at the heart of the city. The building committee collected contributions from both Jews and non-Jews alike. And we, in fact, in our archives have the original document, the subscription document, where pledges were made for the construction of Emmanuel back in 1862. On June 2nd, 1863, a year later, less than a year later, cornerstones were laid following a procession and ceremony that included Victoria's mayor, the chief justice, city councilors, and officials of numerous community organizations. Especially conspicuous were the city's 2 Freemason lodges, of which Jews were prominent members. By September, enough work had been done to hold high holiday services in the sanctuary. Upon completion, the building was the first brick house of worship in the city. It is now designated a historic site with the distinction of being the oldest synagogue in continuous use in Canada. In 2013, just to jump forward for a moment, in 2013, we had the pleasure of joining our friends in the Victoria Jewish community for a parade. There's the building upon construction, sorry. And this is us at a parade. Retracing the steps of the original procession back in 1863 on the occasion of Emmanuel's 150th anniversary. I learned on that day the word sesquicentennial, which is a formal term for 150 years. We marched from the Freemasons Hall, led by a full retinue of Masons and a marching band, past City Hall, where the mayor joined us. That's him standing at center, and on to the synagogue, where the Masons performed the stone laying ceremony and speeches were delivered by local leaders and dignitaries. There's the synagogue as it looks today. Many Jews thrived in the relatively egalitarian atmosphere of Victoria. Primarily from the merchant class, their influence extended well beyond providing the city's material needs. As Victoria's second elected mayor, Lumley Franklin became the first Jewish mayor in British North America. He and his brother Selim were co-founders of the Victoria Philharmonic Society. Elected to the second Legislative Assembly of Vancouver Island, Selim Franklin was the first Jewish member. And yet another first, when the amalgamated colony joined the fledgling Canadian Federation in 1871, Henry Nathan Jr. became both one of Victoria's first 2 members of Parliament and its first Jewish member. Samuel Schwartz, born in Victoria in 1865, practiced law in Victoria and in Nelson. Moving to Vancouver in the 1890s, he was appointed in 1914 as the first Jewish county court judge in Canada. In addition to government dignitaries, Jewish organizations and business owners contributed much to the growth of the community, the city, and the nascent province. Established in 1863, the Hebrew Ladies Society of Victoria raised funds for synagogue building costs, constructed and maintained their own adjacent building, educated the congregation's children, and took charge of looking after the cemetery in the 1890s. Its members were also instrumental in establishing the Victoria Jubilee Hospital. Jewish merchants established growing commercial concerns in the late 19th and early 20th century. Among these was Simon Lizer, who arrived in Victoria in the early 1870s. His wholesale grocery business serving Victoria and mainland BC became one of the largest employers in the province. Lizer served as president of the Board of Trade and was a founder of the Royal Theatre, which continues operation today. His brother Max initially operated a successful liquor store, but graduated to property development. He erected the 6-story Hither and Lizer building in 1911 and the 4-story Kaiserhof Hotel in 1912. The collapse of the local economy in 1913 stalled the optimistic growth of the previous decades, and the start of war shifted the economic priorities of the region. The sinking of the Lusitania in 1915 sparked anti-German demonstrations, and the unfortunately named Kaiserhof Hotel was among the buildings sacked by the mob. Max Lizer repaired and renamed the hotel, and it remains standing today. As nearby Vancouver grew into a major city, Victoria receded in importance in the early 20th century. The Jewish population diminished, and with it, the ability to support and maintain the Emmanuel Synagogue. In 1948, the aging structure was modernized. Windows were sealed off, the brick wrapped in a veneer of stucco, and a false ceiling installed to improve heat efficiency. But in the late 1970s, Victoria and many other North American cities experienced a growing interest in the preservation of turn-of-the-century buildings. Emmanuel was one of the beneficiaries of this wave, undergoing significant restoration in 1982 and 83, winning multiple awards and receiving designation as a Canadian site of national historic significance. From 1950 to 1975, Victoria's Jewish population more than doubled to 211,000. In 1971, Congregation Emmanuel hired a full-time rabbi for the first time in 30 years. Reflecting the continued growth of the community, new congregations were established in the 1990s and early 2000s. Reform, Orthodox, Humanist, and Chabad congregations now complement the offerings of the conservative Congregation Emmanuel. The Jewish Community Center of Victoria opened in 1988, providing a hub for secular Jewish gathering. Today, Victoria's Jewish community remains vibrant, active, and diverse. And as in the city's early days, Jewish-run businesses have an important place in the local economy. The city of Vancouver was formally established in 1886 upon the completion of the Transcontinental Railway, when it was selected to be the terminus. The previous decade had seen a slow trickle of settlers arriving from Victoria to the small settlement then known as Granville, which we see here. And we should note that those who came over beforehand in the 1870s were kind of taking a gamble on Vancouver, which really was not favored to be the terminus for the railway. Rather, nearby New Westminster, with its very royal name, appointed by the Queen herself, was expected to be the terminus. And it was a kind of a last-minute switch that brought things to Vancouver. So among the early arrivals were Jewish shopkeepers who'd found success first in the California Gold Rush and then BC's Caribou Gold Rush. Brothers David and Isaac Oppenheimer were emblematic of this wave of immigrants. They arrived in Vancouver in 1886, following mercantile success in Victoria and Yale, and opened a grocery supply business. They immediately became involved in local politics, both brothers serving as aldermen, and in 1888, David was elected the second mayor of Vancouver. Serving for 4 years, he built vital infrastructure to facilitate the city's growth and raised funds for civic works by selling bonds in London. Today, he's recognized informally as the father of Vancouver, and formally as a person of national historic significance. That's him there, looking very dignified. And this is his shop, his warehouse, which is said to be the only building to survive the fire of 1886. And today is a recording studio run by Brian Adams. Now, Hastings Street and the area known today as Gastown, which is where this and the previous photo were taken, was the commercial hub at the time. It was dotted with Jewish-owned businesses, including the Gold Hotel, operated by Louis and Emma Gold, Zebulon Franks' hardware store, Rabinowitz Grocers, and the shops of Jack Levy and Simon Petersky. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, brought a second wave of migrants fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe. Many young Jews in Russia and Poland surveyed the poverty and anti-Semitism their families faced and saw no future for themselves. They set out on arduous journeys to distant lands, including Palestine, Shanghai, South Africa, and North America. And as is plain to see, Vancouver was about as far away as one could travel. In the days before commercial flights, it was a dangerous, long, and expensive trip. And many of these folks left with very little expectation that they would ever see their families again. These immigrants settled in the working class neighborhood of the East End, known today as Strathcona. This soon became the heart of the Vancouver Jewish community. The location of the first synagogue, Bnei Yehuda, which later became Sharet Tzedek, and the original location of Talmud Torah, which the Jewish day school, which operated for a time out of the old Sharet Tzedek building, which we see here at the back on the right. That was the original building built for the synagogue, and there were, over time, the congregation grew, and the three houses that filled in the rest of the block were knocked down to make room for this larger building. It's said that local chapters of many volunteer organizations were established around kitchen tables in East End homes, including the National Council of Jewish Women, the Achdut Society, and B'nai B'rith. The East End was never, and here is an interior shot of Sharet Tzedek around 1920. The East End was never an exclusively Jewish neighborhood, but rather a mosaic of diverse immigrant communities, including Italian, Ukrainian, Black, Chinese, and Japanese communities. Lord Strathcona School, an elementary school located across the street from Sharet Tzedek, was known for many years as the League of Nations, due to the diversity of its students. Today, the Jewish Museum and Archives of BC leads walking tours of this neighborhood, including a cross-cultural tour offered in collaboration with over 20 organizations representing diverse cultural communities. Now, while there was certainly the occasional derogatory remark thrown around, for the most part, these communities lived peacefully alongside one another, supporting each other's businesses and looking out for each other's children. The other key takeaway here is that Vancouver is a bit unique among North American cities, that there never really was a Jewish ghetto, so to speak, isolated community. It's always kind of been a mix. There have been neighborhoods that where Jews have concentrated, but they've never really had the neighborhood to themselves. Now, a beloved leading figure of this era was Reverend Nathan Pastinsky, who lived a few blocks from Sharet Tzedek Synagogue. He served as the rabbi and the shochet, despite having never completed his formal training, which is why we call him Reverend instead of Rabbi, and acted as an ambassador well beyond the community. He was a frequent fixture at the local port, welcoming new immigrants, and served as a translator of Slavic languages for the local police. Lineups of new arrivals, both Jewish and non-Jewish, could be seen along the sidewalk outside the Basinski home each Friday night, welcomed in for 2 or 3 sittings of a free hot meal prepared by Basinski's wife, Frida. 2 doors down from the Basinski home was that of Zebulon and Yetta Franks. An immigrant from Ukraine, Zebulon Franks began his career as a peddler before establishing his eponymous store in the heart of the old commercial district, Gastown. The store was open 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and provided everything the logger, fisherman, trapper, or miner would need, alongside such housewares as stoves, feather dusters, irons, and wash basins. For the company went on to exclusively sell home appliances for many, many years. For a time, the family lived in an apartment above the store, and it is said that they held there the first documented Jewish services in Vancouver. Franks went on to play an instrumental role in the subsequent establishment of Sheretz Tzedek Synagogue. Sorry, sun's going down over here. Gotta turn on the light. Okay. Here we have a photo from around the time from 1923 on nearby Bowen Island, which is kind of a small little vacation island, short ferry right away. And you can see on the bottom, it says Zionists and Hebrew Aid Picnic, Bowen Island, July 5th, 1923. Now across town, the West End was another hub of Jewish activity. This is English Bay, which is a landmark of the West End, near Stanley Park, if anyone has been out here. The West End was another hub of Jewish activity, comprised of Jews from Central European cities, including Frankfurt, Berlin, and Vienna. These members of the community were more inclined towards Reform Judaism, in contrast to the Orthodox Jews that appeared, the Orthodox Judaism that appealed to their brethren in the East End. These community members had typically lived in the United States for many years and were better able to navigate North American society. A Reform congregation was established and land was purchased to build a synagogue in 1911. But the onset of World War I interrupted these plans. And in the years following the war, the property was sold to support the expansion of Sheretz Tzedek, which I mentioned earlier. In 1915, the West End Jews established the Free Loan Association to help new arrivals to the East End establish themselves in Vancouver. And the Free Loan Association remains in operation today, providing loans to members of the community who need help getting started, who want to start a business. There's a wide-ranging criteria. As entrepreneurs from the East End gained success, many aspired to relocate to the more exclusive West End, and some did, including the Petersky family, whose general stores in Vancouver and Steveston did booming business at the turn of the century. Steveston was so crowded with salmon fishing one year, there's canneries down there, that it was known for a time as Salmonopolis. Now, a landmark of the West End Jewish community that remains to this day is the Sylvia Hotel, built by Abe Goldstein in 1912 and named for his daughter Sylvia. Sylvia and her husband Harry Ablowitz were very active in the community throughout their lives, supporting many important causes. The story of the family and the hotel were the inspiration for a pair of short plays produced by local theater company Kol Halev in 2017. In the early 20th century, Jewish families began moving to the neighborhoods of Mount Pleasant and Fairview. These areas were essentially suburbs at the time, with easy access to downtown via the newly expanded streetcar network. They now are the heart of the city. Reflecting this change, Jewish community institutions also relocated to be closer to their members. The Jewish Community Center opened at 11th Avenue and Oak Street in 1928, an upgrade from the neighborhood house that had briefly been operated by the National Council of Jewish Women at 800 Jackson Street in Strathcona. The new JCC provided support to new immigrants, education, arts, and athletic spaces for all ages, an office space for many Jewish organizations. The Center Bulletin was a regular dispatch of dialogue and nachas in the community, evolving over the years to become the weekly newspaper, the Jewish Western Bulletin, and later the Jewish Independent, which operates today. Among the children growing up in the working class East End in the 1930s was Dave Barrett, a young man who would go on to become the first and only Jewish premier of British Columbia. Oh, sorry, there it is. Leading the leftist New Democrat Party to 3 years of government in 1972. Knowing he would have a brief window to course correct from the 20-year reign of his conservative predecessor, W.A.C. Bennett, Barrett quoted a popular song of the day when he began his term, telling his team, "We're here for a good time, not a long time." The team got straight to work, passing an avalanche of legislation the British Columbians still benefit from today. So the shift away from Strathcona continued through the following decades. Institutional growth stagnated in the 30s, impacting the economic recession, but by the late 40s brought a resurgence. 1948 was a turning point for the community, with modern congregation Sheretz Tzedek, conservative congregation Beth Israel, and Talmud Torah Jewish Day School all opening their new purpose-built facilities along Oak Street. All three remain in operation today. And there's the congregation as it stands today, though each has been substantially updated in the 70 years since. And the image I showed earlier here is the Jewish Community Center's subsequent building, where it still resides in the neighborhood of Oak Ridge, which is further south. This building was built. Oak Ridge was made available, purchased from the Canadian Pacific Railway in the 1950s, and this building was constructed in 1960. And Oak Ridge was, for the post-war generation, a real hub of the community and remains today. Vancouver grew significantly in the years following World War II, as did the Jewish community. An estimated 2,600 Jewish people arrived in Vancouver between 1939 and 48, almost doubling the population from 2,900 to 5,500. While many new members of the Vancouver Jewish community were new European immigrants, a substantial number of first or second generation Canadians arriving from elsewhere in Canada, or families who'd lived in the United States for years or generations. From Fairview, where the previous JCC had been, the community shifted further south in the post-war years to the newly developed neighborhood of Oak Ridge, where this Jewish Community Center of Greater Vancouver still stands today, an anchor of the community. In the decades since, the Jewish population of Greater Vancouver has kept pace with general population growth, hovering at around 1%. While earlier generations found comfort living close together, subsequent generations have dispersed to all corners of Vancouver and its surrounding suburbs. Factors contributing to such a decision include the ever-increasing cost of living and a general decline in sentiment of anti-Semitism. Over the years, Vancouver Jewish community has welcomed new members from around the world, and waves of new immigrants have paralleled world affairs, leaving Hungary during that country's revolution in 1956, South Africa during apartheid, the crumbling Soviet Union, and the former Yugoslav states. Recent years have seen an increase in Jews arriving from Israel, Russia, and Latin America. And though the community remains predominantly Ashkenazi, the Sephardi community has grown significantly since the first arrivals in the 1970s, comprising members with Moroccan, Syrian, Rhodesli, and Iranian roots. Nearby Seattle has a much older Sephardi community, and over time, families have relocated here. New organizations and congregations have blossomed with each successive wave, covering a wide spectrum of political leanings and degrees of observance. A portion of these migrations have been the result of unified community efforts to provide support to people fleeing their homelands. Jewish Family Services, Jewish Federation, and its predecessors combined Jewish Appeal and the Community Fund and Council, as well as local congregations of all denominations, have supported refugees, both Jewish and non-Jewish, to escape volatile regions and resettle in Canada. Small Jewish communities exist in various corners of British Columbia, far beyond Vancouver and its suburbs. This photo is from the Sunshine Coast. Some, like the towns of the Kootenay boundary region, close to the Alberta border, and the northern town of Prince George, have roots dating back to the gold rush. Others, like the Okanagan, wine country, the Sunshine Coast, Whistler, and central Vancouver Island, are younger communities where community gatherings began in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. What is interesting to observe are the parallels between communities large and small, and organizations large and small. After all, every large community began small and grew over time. In each case, whether in 1890 or 1990, gatherings generally begin ad hoc around kitchen tables, rec rooms, and eventually in rented halls. Perhaps a group of families begin to feel that their sense of Judaism is not being fulfilled by the existing congregations, or a group of friends see a need that no other organization is fulfilling. Eventually, once a core group of supporters is defined, paperwork is signed and an organization or congregation is formally established. Throughout the regional Jewish history, we see examples time and again of established organizations lending support to newer ones during their early development. Now, Justin asked me to mention a few notable figures from our community history. So we're going to dive into a quick lightning round and then go to questions. So get your questions percolating and ready. So in our recently published book, which I happen to have right here, looking back, moving forward, 160 years of Jewish life in BC, we feature over 200 notable individuals, each of whom has made a significant contribution or impact in their respective fields. I'll try to be more limited here and just highlight a handful of these inspiring figures. I mentioned earlier David Oppenheimer, the second mayor of Vancouver, as well as brothers Lumley and Selim Franklin, mayor of Victoria and member of the Legislative Assembly, respectively. In the century and a half since these pioneers redefined, the strata Jews could aspire to, we've seen many others enter positions of leadership. Muni Evers on the left there served as the mayor of New Westminster, and Dave Barrett as the premier of BC, who I mentioned earlier, joined in his cabinet by Norman Levy, who we see here, as the Minister of Human Resources. Seema Holt, Bernie Simpson, and Selena Robinson later followed in their footsteps, serving as ministers in the provincial government. Jack Austin, meanwhile, served as Deputy Minister of Energy, Mines, and Resources in the federal government of Pierre Trudeau, and was subsequently appointed to the Senate. Justice Nathan Nemetz served on the Supreme Court of British Columbia and the Court of Appeals before being appointed Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of BC, and eventually Chief Justice of BC. Major General Ed Fitch served with the United Nations and NATO during the Civil War in the former Yugoslavia. On promotion to Brigadier General, he held the appointment of Commander, Land Force, Western Area, headquartered in Edmonton, Alberta. Cornelia and Peter Oberlander arrived in Vancouver in 1953. Both were refugees of Nazism. The two had met while attending Harvard University Graduate School of Design. At the University of British Columbia, Peter established Canada's first professional program in community and regional planning. He went on to be the inaugural Deputy Minister of Canada's Ministry of State for Urban Affairs, a co-founder of the United Nations Conference on Human Settlements, and a senior advisor to the United Nations Secretary General. Cornelia, meanwhile, was a pioneering and world-renowned landscape architect. Collaborating over her 70-year career with acclaimed architects including Arthur Erickson, Renzo Piano, and Moshe Safdie. She even had a brooch that Moshe Safdie made for her. She was very proud of. In addition to designing many of Vancouver's best-known landmarks, her projects included the Canadian embassies in Berlin and Washington, D.C., and the head office of the New York Times. I could continue all night, but perhaps I'll wrap it up with just one more example. Dr. Robert Krell was born in The Hague, Holland in 1940 and survived the Holocaust in hiding with a Gentile family. He went on to train in psychiatry and did pioneering work, helping fellow child survivors to heal from their wartime trauma. After co-chairing the Standing Committee on Holocaust Education, which coordinated annual symposia for high school students, Dr. Krell established and served as founding president of the Vancouver Holocaust Education Center, which opened in November 1994. Members of our community, including those I've mentioned here, hold countless honors, including many Orders of Canada, Orders of BC, Queen's Jubilee medals for the Queen's Silver, Gold, and Platinum Jubilees, and professional honors in too many fields to list. They've made outsized contributions to the local economy, to Canadian society, and to disciplines including law, public health, early childhood development, arts education, ethnomusicology, and much, much more. I've only scratched the surface of our community's amazing history. To learn more, I invite you to review our online exhibits and listen to our podcast, The Kitchen Stories, or order a copy of our new book. All are available on our website, jewishmuseum.ca. And if you find yourselves in Vancouver, please be in touch. We'd love to take you on a walking tour. Thank you for having me. I'd be happy to answer any questions. This photo is actually at Maple Tree Square, which was that black and white photo I showed at the start of men gathered around a tree. And that building on the left there, it is in both photos. Been there all along. Okay, Justin, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I do. Michael, can you hear me?
Hi.
My name is Norman Miller. I live in Houston, but I'm related to many families in Vancouver. I was first in Vancouver when I was 6 months old. I have my uncle, Mort Rothstein, wrote a private autobiography for the family. And among other things, it describes his childhood in Vancouver from 1922 to 1948. And I would be very happy to send it to you if you'll send me your address.
We would love that. That'd be like Norm Rothstein, as in
Morton. He's
Morton.
Norman Rothstein's cousin.
Ah, I was speaking to Harley recently.
Yeah, it was a large family. He will be 100 years old in September.
Wow, we would love to receive that. Thank you.
Okay, can you email that to nrmiller4@gmail.com? N as in
Okay.
Norman, nrmiller4. And I'll FedEx it to you. I'm also related to Leon Kahn, Julius Balsheim, Gary Romalis, Barney Prosterman. A lot of family there.
That's a big family. I know almost all those people.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's lovely.
Certainly.
Can't hear you, Justin.
Still can't hear you.
I see that Marion has a hand up. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
So again, Jewish geography, my connection to Vancouver is Alan Morenis, you know?
Yeah.
So is he in anywhere on your notes for any reason whatsoever other than just an author?
Alan Marinas?
Yes,
I grew up with his daughter, Julia.
right. The great
And
Musar.
Alan
I mean,
has stopped by the museum once in a while and provided us with material about the family history. Yeah.
good. Okay. You know, you just have to throw out what you do know, you know? So were any of these people tour guides at all because of the lay of the land and how things did? I know most Jews are merchants, but did any of those people do things that had to do with, because Alaskan cruises have been going on forever. Nothing affected by that you know of?
I haven't heard about tour guides. I have heard about, in the very, very early days, Jews acting as kind of emissaries to the First Nations communities and being traders of goods and masks and things back and forth and having shops in that regard. Yeah. So
Again, in the retail, in
nature.
the retail business still.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
So you can't hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, anyway, who knows? All right, yeah, so there's a couple questions in the chat here. Diane's asking about anti-Semitism and if that's ever been an issue in British Columbia.
Yeah. Yeah. Anti-Semitism has always kind of been present, but there have been very few instances. I mean, there's anti-Semitism in terms of in the early days of Vancouver, in the when Vancouver was booming and growing up in the 40s and 50s, you know, we've heard tell of a Jewish couple, newly married, going for a drive with their real estate agent, takes them to a neighborhood and says, "Oh, you'll love it here. It's a great neighborhood for a young family, and they don't allow any of those Jews or blacks around here. It's great." So that was kind of, I mean, I think that was sadly prevalent culture across North America, and just accepted. In terms of really bad anti-Semitism, I mean, there is history of pockets of neo-Nazis and white supremacists in like more rural areas outside of the major cities, but there haven't really been significant flare-ups over the years. There was an instance when one of the synagogues in 1980 was firebombed, and it was speculated it was anti-Semitism, but it was deemed that the guy was just a drunk, didn't really know what he was doing. So, you know, yeah, it's there, but it's not, I don't think it's as bad as many other places.
Yeah, Michael actually put that in the chat that Temple Shalom was firebombed. Judy was asking about, you know, looking at the largest cities in British Columbia, the current Jewish populations in those cities.
The current demographics and population of Jews in the specific cities, I don't know specifically. Okay, can young people afford to live there? Yes, okay. Victoria has been growing there are many retirees who moved there 10, 20 years ago that are part of the community there. With the rising costs of living in Vancouver, younger families have been attracted to smaller communities outside of Vancouver, including Victoria. And so, you know, I know a number of friends of my age who have moved there over the past few years, but the secret got out really, and Victoria has quickly caught up to Vancouver in terms of being, you know, $1 million homes. So it's not really such a bargain anymore. But it, you know, now with folks being able to work remotely and desiring a more quiet pace of life, Victoria does remain quite attractive and is picking up in activity. Yeah, I am sorry I don't have specific numbers how many folks live everywhere. And while there is a census that is done, I think it's every 5 years among the Jewish community, it's sometimes hard to pin down because there are folks who are Jewish but don't really identify or don't really want to be involved in formal organizations. And when folks leave town, it's harder to keep track of them.
And Rhoda wants to know if you can speak about migration from Winnipeg to Vancouver, any migration from Winnipeg to Vancouver.
Tons. Oh, Carol Herbert, sorry, to answer my question.
Is Carol?
Carol's our board president, and she,
okay.
the data specialist. She
I was
jumped
about
in.
to say you have
There
to
you
go on
go.
the payroll, but she's already, well, not the payroll, but she already, you know, volunteers for you guys. Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, you were asking the question about
The migration from Winnipeg to Vancouver.
Winnipeg had a massive, probably Canada's largest Jewish community in the middle decades of the century. And I think probably starting around the 60s, folks started coming out here, maybe even earlier actually, in the post-war period. A lot of families came out here because the climate was more manageable. And so there's a significant chunk of Jews, which I alluded to earlier in terms of Jewish community members coming from other Canadian cities. That would be Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, primarily. Massive numbers of people came from all three. Winnipeg earlier on, Montreal, as a result of the kind of political instability and like threats of succession in the 70s and 80s, and Toronto more recently. And now, to get back to the question about anti-Semitism, another friend of the organization mentions here that the ornate Shaughnessy Mansion, which is home to the hospice for sick children supported by Vancouver Canucks, was once the headquarters of the BC branch of the KKK. So they were here. The next question from Marilyn Fireman is asking about French speaking, not nearly the degree that it is in Montreal. There's a small French community and there's 1 or 2 French schools. But when you're in Montreal, it's everywhere you turn, every shop, and everyone can pretty much speak both languages. So, and if they only speak one language, it's probably French.
Is there any
Yeah, we were there. English to French to English, you know, just like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a bunch of some, you know, Jewish museums in Canada, for example, like even in St. John as a museum, and what is there any level of like collaboration or communication that the museums in the different cities share in Canada that you know
Yeah.
of?
Yeah, so we're in close contact with the Montreal Jewish Museum, with the National Archives, the National Jewish Archives, and various other Jewish museums. I mean, collaboration minimal in terms of like actually co-developing an exhibit or a program together. But we do share notes and, you know, kind of draw inspiration from one another. There's an annual conference for all North American Jewish museums, and the Canadian ones generally show up for that. And so we get to meet them and trade notes. Yeah.
Any other questions out there for Michael? Meryl, did you have another question?
Norman.
I just wanted to point out two side notes on David Oppenheimer. There's a beautiful renovated lit and landscape statue of him at the entrance of Stanley Park, not far from the Hotel Sylvia. And because when he was mayor, he created Stanley Park. He had the foresight. And second, Oppenheimer is the first incorporated corporation in British Columbia. It's the oldest, and it's still in continuous existence.
I didn't know that. I knew about the statue. I didn't know about incorporation. That's very interesting. Thank you. Yeah.
I think Henrietta, you have a question?
Yes. Do you know if there are any organizations that foster the Yiddish language? Is Yiddish taught in any of the Jewish schools or synagogues?
As a matter of fact, our offices are in the Peretz Center, which is a Yiddish school that was extremely active in the 50s and 60s, is less so today, but they still teach Yiddish courses. They do a kind of secular humanist bar mitzvah program, and they have a very impressive library of Yiddish literature.
We have a very strong Houston Yiddish people, and we foster out since Zoom is on. We have an international group, but I don't know anyone from your area of Canada who's on our Winkle, so I was curious. There's a time difference also.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, Henrietta. Alicia, do you have a question?
Oh, well, I just wanted to tell her that the Parrots group does have a Zoom reading session twice a month. And because it's Zoom, we now also, we have at least one member who joins us from California. Mostly we're local, but contact the Parrot Center if you want to join us. We get together 2 Thursdays a month, 10:30 Pacific time, AM.
Rhoda?
Michael, have any Jews migrated or moved to Chemainus?
I'm sure there's some. I couldn't name them. I don't know.
But it
yeah,
has to be
Chemainus is
lower
very
class.
pretty.
Yeah, it is really pretty. Yeah.
Any last questions out there? All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming.
How do I contact the woman who said she has a meeting? Can you give her my information?
Yeah, well, Justin, do you have Henrietta's info?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, we'll make that happen for you. No problem.
Well, thanks, Michael. Thanks. I really appreciate you presenting to us tonight, telling us all about Jews in British Columbia. Thanks again to also our 5 partnering congregations as well. We'll see you all soon.